On the behalf of Usanas Foundation and Central University of Jammu, I would like to welcome all of you today for this great discussion on a very historic event which took place 3 years back. And some of us were actually the part of this event and were very close witness to this great event which happened 3 years back in Jammu and Kashmir. So to begin with, I would like to welcome our chief guest, Dr. Sanjeev Jain, Vice Chancellor, Central University of Jammu, who would be joining us in a short while. And then I welcome Lieutenant General Ata Hasnain Sahab, who has been a very distinguished and veteran speaker for our Usanas Foundation events in the past on several occasions. He has blessed us, he has helped us and supported us in various capacities over the last 2 years, 3 years in our various events. He also spoke at our Maharana Pratap annual security dialogue, and his articles and his insights on Kashmir, like they have become a standard today. People like we have learned Kashmir through his writings, through his articles. And then I would like to welcome all our eminent panelists. I'll just read out their brief bios here. Okay. So we have today with us Dr. Barzeen Wagmar, who is inaugural Visiting India Fellow, Royal United Services Institute, affiliate of CIS, CSP, SSAI at London School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS. Then I'm going to be one of the panelists. I'm CEO of Usanas Foundation. And we have Dr. Michael Kugelman, who is Asia Program Deputy Director and Senior Associate, South Asia, Woodrow Wilson Center. We have Dr. Suneem Khan with us, who is a Srinagar-based Kashmir expert. And we have Dr. Jeganaathan, Security and Development, Assistant Professor, Department of National Security Studies at Central University of Jammu. So with this, I'll just add my brief welcome address and I'll hand over the baton to General Hasnain for the rest of the session. Sir, over to you.
Thank you very much, Abhinav. A pleasure and honor to be with you and your great organization. Very fine. I think it's now almost about 3 or 4 years old. Usanas is about 4 years old now. Yes, I've been associated with it and I enjoy being associated. That's the more important thing. And thank you and compliments to everyone on the 3rd anniversary of this event, the 5th of August, what happened in 2019. This is the 3rd anniversary of it. 2 years, of course, went by with the pandemic and not much could be really achieved in that period. But despite that, yes, we have made tremendous progress. And I think the theme chosen for this particular webinar has been very, very appropriate. A roadmap looking towards peace, security, and development. Mostly people just talk about development. What has happened in the last 3 years in Kashmir? What is the development which has happened? Not linking the aspect to that ultimate aim is peace, security leading to peace, which will lead to development. That's an issue which can always debate what should come before the other, or all this can it happen simultaneously or not. We put together a great panel, I must say. Welcoming Mr. Kugelman also here now. It's wonderful to have you also on board with us. Everyone, all the panelists, achievers in their own right. I would say, in my brief introduction, I would say, if I was given a choice through history, when would I have removed Article 370? Not abrogated, but actually, amended it or whatever made it not applicable to Jammu and Kashmir at all. Perhaps in my thinking, I would have done it in 1972, just after the Shimla Agreement. But I would have said that was the time and it became irrelevant completely. The situation changed. UN resolutions were no longer relevant. We had a new agreement. It was supposed to be bilateral, India and Pakistan. Of course, Pakistan refuses to follow that narrative. That's their choice. But the application of Article 370 became irrelevant completely. Perhaps the leadership of that time did not think it appropriate to go beyond and bite a little too much after the victory in Bangladesh and East Pakistan. The next time I thought this could have happened was 1994. 1994, a lot of people forget that a very major event happened. 22nd of February 1994, we had the passage of a resolution joint resolution by both houses of parliament, all parties coming together. Something which we can find very difficult happening today. But at that time, it happened under the Prime Ministership of Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, of Mr. Narasimha Rao at that time, and in the leader of the opposition being Mr. Vajpayee. And if you remember the context of that time, why did it happen that time? Because India was under tremendous international pressure on the issue of human rights, which was being, the narrative which Pakistan was spinning around the world. And the first Human Rights Council meeting was about to take place in Geneva. And we were really put on the map at that time. Perhaps the kind of political consensus we achieved at that time would have stood us in very good stead. And today, 25, 28 years down the line, we would have found Kashmir completely integrated, not to say that it's not integrated today. But we would have perhaps gained much more time. Finally, it happened when it had to happen, 5th of August 2019, and led immediately to the publication of the map, the very famous map of the 1st of October 2019, which shows the golden area in the west, that is Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and the state of and the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir put together. And then you have the whole of Ladakh, that's Gilgit-Baltistan, Aksai Chin, and Ladakh put together, including the Shaksgam Valley, all shown in a very, very pleasant blue. This is now a signatory map which is going around the world. This is the narrative which India has put out. This is the map we aspired for. The map we still aspire for. And that's the official map of the state of Jammu and the territory of Jammu and Kashmir, which belongs to India. This is a very important point to start this whole thing on. Having said that, there are a series of questions which come to my mind, not in any order. So, 3 years down the line, what are the issues that are relevant? Is security more important than development today? Have we achieved enough in security to say that the development agenda has now overtaken the security agenda? My mind, for the better part from 1989 onwards till 2019, it was the security agenda which overrode everything. It was the Indian Army which was the most relevant organization as far as Jammu and Kashmir was concerned. Has that time passed? Is the development agenda therefore more significant than the security agenda? Has the all of government approach finally come to be applied in Jammu and Kashmir? You must remember that Jammu and Kashmir, the issue of the proxy war it's a hybrid proxy war. You can bring in all kinds of definitions, hybrid, gray zone, whatever you wish to call it. But for these kind of situations, which are not conventional war situations, you have essentially to deal with them in the methodology of all of government approach. Has that approach been finally adopted? What is proxy war? What are the remnants of proxy war, gray zone war, or hybrid war, which still continue to exist in Jammu and Kashmir? How has Pakistan come to establish a better narrative control? You notice today, Pakistan's narrative agenda is going around the world at the moment. Lots and lots of efforts by the inter-service public relations, which is going on at the moment. Have we been able to counter it sufficiently, or is that agenda still being played out effectively? Is democracy absolutely essential, or should we await full stability before reintroducing full democracy? Remember 1989 when this started? In 7 years, in 1996, we introduced democracy. Even with a 2% turnout of the electorate in Sopore and the 7% turnout in Srinagar, lots and lots of analysts will say that the return of democracy made a difference to Jammu and Kashmir. Is that true? Is that true today too? It's a political problem, we understand. If it's a political problem, how must the politics of the state be played today? We find that the one thing which is missing in the whole agenda is politics. Grassroots politics is being played out to an extent through an unstructured Panchayati Raj system, which is working quite well, to my mind. But the larger aspect of politics, as far as the impending elections to the State Assembly or to the Union Territory Assembly, how and best way can it be played out. Have we turned the tide on the security front? What have we achieved? Is the killing of terrorists and the reduction of the terrorist strength the only means of assessing that we have turned the security situation around? Is the return of Kashmiri Pandits a psychological barrier in our minds that we must overcome to establish for full and final control? And my last 2 points on this.
The comprehensive desk reporting research program, including the evaluation and assessment audit report and study, were identified and reviewing the particular attention
I request everyone to please mute their mics
and report that assist follow up
all the participants, please mute yourself.
There's someone
discussion.
Yes.
The key formative
Please mute
discussion
yourself,
was
all the
made with the
participants.
key information providing the background
Please.
information and further several meeting and conference at which key
I
information
suspect
presented and finding
intrusion
and
by the
study of the
adversary.
counter-insurgency program
It is a panel in that,
on the
where
live
you're
survey, a
you can
detailed
This is a robotic intervention.
yeah done
looks like. Yes.
This
Sorry
happens.
for
It happens. I do suspect a robotic intervention in this.
I think our friends are getting jittery across the border.
Okay, so I spoke about the Kashmiri Pandits, and last 2 or maybe 3 points. What is the role of radicalism in this? Extremism, radicalism, ideological content, what is the role of this? Have we in the last 3 years been able to address it? Or if not, how do we intend to address it? And lastly, one of the most important social problems, psychological. How must the territory of Jammu and Kashmir across with the Pir Panjal in the middle, how must these 2 territories be psychologically linked with each other? I think these are some of the relevant issues which came to my mind, 10 issues which I identified. And when I look at Jammu and Kashmir and assess Jammu and Kashmir, I find the most appropriate way of doing it is by looking at it in 5 domains: the military, the political, social, economic, psychological, and diplomatic. If you cover these 5 domains, you have covered the entire problem of Jammu and Kashmir. So with that bit of an introduction, may I invite, has the Vice Chancellor fetched in? No, not yet. Okay. We have a constraint on time, so all our panelists will be requested to carry out their interventions in 10 minutes or so. Make your major points. There's no need. Most of us are experienced people here. We need not go into explaining the rationale or the background behind a point that you're making. Make it, and I'm sure something to be explained. You can always do it a little later too. So may I start with Mr. Berzain Wagmar as our first panelist, as introductions have already been made, and of course he's linked with RUSI, an organization which I consider a center of excellence. So we look forward to your intervention, Mr. Berzain. Thank you. You are muted, Mr. Berzain. You are muted.
Very much, General Hasnain. Thank you, Usanas Foundation, and a very good afternoon from England to one and all. I don't know about interventions, General. I leave that to you and the battlefield. My sort tend to be the armchair civvies that you like to deride, and quite rightly so. I accede to one of the forces men when he says that. I will come to this, it's my approach, not so much an intervention as an Orientalist and as a historian, because facts as usual are the first casualty, and in the 10-minute compass I have allotted to me very kindly, I shall be maybe acting as a forces man and bombarding with certain salient facts. So let's start with this, Mr. Pandya and other guests. Jinnah made 3 visits, 26, 36, and 44 to Jammu and Kashmir. On all 3 visits, he was not interested in liaising with the Muslim Conference, which was the local party on the ground and antagonist to the Abdullah's National Conference. And at no point did he seek a rapprochement, as he did across other British India provinces, where the Muslim League was building a critical mass of opinion in order to gain traction for the Pakistan movement. You could say that he did not want to invite Hari Singh's ayah as something of a reactionary monarch, true, but at the same time, he did not actively pursue this. So one is left wondering as a historian why, especially on his last visit in 44, he could not even seek a rapprochement between the All India Muslim League and the Muslim Conference. Number two, Mountbatten arrived in Lahore on 2nd November 1947 and offered Jinnah a plebiscite, one governor general to another, in order to avoid an inter-dominion war, as you rightly know. Jinnah refused. So the next time Pakistanis bang on about plebiscite, please remind them of the Quaid-e-Azam, who in November 47 outright rejected one. Point number three, and there is something in the intervening decade, but I want to jump to Article 370 because that is the fulcrum of our conversation. Nehru on 27th November 1963 mentioned in the Lok Sabha that it is, quote, a part of certain transitional provisional arrangements. It is not a permanent part of the Constitution. It is a part so long as it remains so, close quote. So this idea that it has to be effected in perpetuum, in infinity, is sheer nonsense, as the parliamentary record amply attests. Coming back again now, back to 48. Jinnah, as I said, rejected plebiscite. Then what happened? Sir Owen Dixon of the UN Commission rightly pointed out, as he did, and this is where it becomes uncomfortable for Pakistan, quote, I was prepared to adopt this view that when the frontier of the state of Jammu and Kashmir was crossed on, I believe, 20th October 47 by hostile elements, it was contrary to international law, and that when in May 48, as I believe, units of the regular Pakistani forces moved into the territory of the state, that too was inconsistent with international law, close quote. And that May 48 bit is actually the nub of the issue, given the UN Resolution 47 of the preceding month, April 48, when Sir Zafrullah Khan, Pakistan's first and only Ahmadi permanent representative to the General Assembly and Security Council, let the cat inadvertently out of the bag when he mentioned to the Security Council that, well, it's not just the Azad Kashmir forces who are in operation, but there are 3 brigades of the Pakistan Army too. The Security Council was not a little disquieted and did ask Sir Zafrullah for clarification from Karachi that this is May 48. And Sir Zafrullah, you never thought it necessary to mention to the Security Council and General Assembly in all these ensuing months that there are units of the Royal Pakistan Army, a Dominion force, actually imbricated with Azad irregular forces or freedom fighters, as you would have us believe. And that was, shall we say, the first uncomfortable moment for Pakistan because they had to admit. And of course, Sir Zafrullah Khan went on to admit that ground situation has changed, and you can understand that there's chaos, and this is what happens in a belligerent situation, and all of that. Well, so much for that. And then what happened? On 30th April 48, Pakistan rejected a plebiscite when Nehru again was willing to review it as such. By this time, the UN was, with sheer goodwill, also willing to do regional plebiscites, Mr. Pandya. But Pakistan said, no, we must have an entire plebiscite of the entire erstwhile kingdom of Jammu and Kashmir. And then Pakistan flip-flopped, which it always does. That's its signature modus operandi. And then it said, well, we are willing to have partition and parcel out the valley, and the rest can be decided subsequently. But partition of the erstwhile kingdom was never on decks. It was, as Pakistan maintained robustly, either a plebiscite or not. So now it was willing to flip-flop and say we can have a partition. And then by this time, of course, as we know, or everyone ought to know, there was the famous, if not notorious, April 49 secret agreement in Karachi with Sardar Ibrahim Khan of the Azad Kashmir forces, by which the Azad Kashmir government in itself dissolved and devolved authority to the Pakistan government. Of course, there were forged signatures on that, and Sardar Ibrahim mentions in his memoirs about this, that this was not what was arranged, but of course, Pakistan took over the entire situation. Again, Pakistan kept this wrapped for decades until Sardar Ibrahim's memoirs came out decades later as such. And it is interesting that this was again dismissed in May 50 by Pakistan. And the so-called Article 370 plebiscite, as General Hasnain pointed out, was never mentioned by Pakistan in UN Resolution 211 after the 65 war, UN Resolution 307 after the 71 war, and after the similar agreement of 72. And of course, as I said, we come back full circle with Jinnah outright rejecting a plebiscite on 2nd November 47. What was the basic nub? And I conclude here, Mr. Pandya. Pakistan had to vacate its forces. Demilitarization had to take place in the western sector of the kingdom, which it had occupied and annexed. And that was what fell in its lap after the chaos of the Poonch uprising and the war, which started in October 47. And according to the UN, and the platform for plebiscite that was laid out, which Joseph Coble, the late Madeleine Albright's father, and Condoleezza Rice's PhD supervisor, mentioned to Nehru, Pakistan has no locus standi in the actual conduct of the plebiscite should that situation occur and it were to be executed. Much to its chagrin, of course, it could not. And also, because it refused to remove its troops, the UN made it clear that a certain quantum of Indian troops had to stay in the valley when the plebiscite would occur because law and order and basic administrative measures had to be in place, which of course Pakistan refused to accept. And it is because of this that I finish now with the principle of international law, Mr. Pandya, which is rebus sic stantibus in Latin, as things stand, according to which India as the original party is exonerated from its obligation, that is to say the plebiscite, under an international undertaking, if there is a vital change in the circumstances existing at the time the obligation was undertaken. Since material circumstances changed, Pakistan's annexation of the western sector, Pakistan's refusal to remove its troops, demobilize for the actual plebiscite to take place, the issue is a dead letter. And international law sides with India every time jibes are preferred at it of why can't you offer a plebiscite if you claim to be the world's largest democracy and an accountable polity at that. International law stands in India's favor. Rebus sic stantibus. Circumstances have changed because circumstances have been manipulated on ground to change, that India has every right legally to rescind the initial offer of plebiscite. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wagmar. You really gave a historian's perspective. As expected, I'm from a historian of standing. Obviously, an excellent perspective. I'm glad you did not even come anywhere near 2019. You kept yourself very, very far from it. Thank you very much for that excellent rendering of the logic and the rationale behind it. Now, I'm in a bit of a dilemma at this time. Do I call in Michael or do I call in Abhinav? Michael, would you like to come in at this time or would you like to follow up after Mr. Pandya?
That's up to you. He's aware that unfortunately...
I was told that you have to leave early or something.
Yes,
but
I do have to leave.
The order at the moment given to me was Mr. Pandya and then you. So if we follow that, would there be a problem?
I don't think so. I could stay another 40 minutes. So if that's okay. I don't want to cause disturbances in the order. So proceed with
Abhinav, all yours now. You are muted, yeah.
Thank you very much, General Hasnain. And I must say, Berzin's barrage of argument was like a burst fire, which is certainly going to make our neighbors very disturbed. Okay? I'm mostly going to focus more on what happened in the last 3 years. So I'll begin with a meeting which actually happened in the Raj Bhavan just a few days before the abrogation or the amendment of Article 370. Some very prominent political leaders, the mainstream politicians, had come to meet the Honorable Governor. And one of them said that if you remove this article, 500 people, 500 men would take up guns in just one week, and it will be all chaos and anarchy in the state. So the Honorable Governor replied that, well, over the last 1 year, I have learned how to differentiate between the militants and the common people of Kashmir, and I have made that connection. I can guarantee not a single person would take up a gun, and that's what happened. So actually, it was a big surprise that after the abrogation of Article 370, contrary to the expectations of various intelligence agencies, counter-terrorism experts, eminent politicians, civil rights activists, nothing actually happened in Kashmir in terms of violence. There were some sporadic incidents, but relatively and more or less, Kashmir was silent. This happened because right before the abrogation of Article 370, the preceding period of like 2 to 3 years, government had taken major steps to dismantle the terror infrastructure by banning Jamaat-e-Islami, banning LOC trade, and going very hard against the militants and unleashing a new narrative. That paid off after the abrogation of Article 370. Now, over the last 3 years, the question arises whether we have made complete utilization of the time which we got in order to deal with the militancy and to unleash the new forces of development and the new narrative, of course, which is the most important part to me. In the militancy field, I feel that certainly Pakistan tried to orchestrate various events after the abrogation of Article 370, but they didn't succeed well. They tried to change the strategy. They floated various proxy organizations like TRF, Kashmir Tigers, with secular sounding names, just to give that secular image to the insurgency, which was basically a very Islamist insurgency in nature. But that also didn't succeed. They started targeting outside workers, laborers. It didn't make much headway. In terms of their international outreach, they were focusing more on generating the right narrative across the world, something which General Hasnain also outlined right at the beginning, that after the abrogation of Article 370, Pakistan's focus was more on the information war, a very heavy and a very aggressive information war against India. And I mean, in this, especially the credit is certainly due to Pakistan. They have created a very robust narrative against India, which continues in many fields even today. Besides that, in the militancy, we have come across a new phenomenon of hybrid militants, in which we see a set of people who are not exactly the part of any terrorist group, but they are provided with weapons, and then they conduct certain terror strikes. After that, they simply disappear, or they just come back to their routine normal lives, which has made it very challenging for the security forces to identify such people and to neutralize them. On the radicalization front, we still see that Jamaat-e-Islami, which was banned, but it is still continues to be having a very strong penetration in the various elements of the state administrations, be it academia, be it police, be it administration, be it civil society, media. It still continues to be so. And as per my interviews with for some of my recent papers, the strategy has changed. They're mostly working as in plain clothes. They're not displaying very overt religious symbols. They're simply projecting themselves as common intellectuals who are scholars, academics, and they're waiting for the right signals for the right time. In terms of infiltration, we have new challenges. The Jammu, Samba, Kathua region has become a new major center for the infiltration. On LOC, certainly a very rigorous surveillance has taken place, or the system has already emerged through our gadgets and through some very advanced surveillance. But the Jammu Samba border region, through which even the Pulwama perpetrators came, is still quite vulnerable, and it has become a major center for the infiltration. And in that also, tunneling has emerged as a very serious problem. Besides that, drone challenge has emerged as a very serious problem, and drones are being used not only to distribute, to smuggle cash and drugs, but weapons are coming in massive quantities. And given the scale at which Pakistan is improvising on the drones, there is a very strong likelihood that in the future they may use drones for infiltration also. This is a possibility in the future. Besides that, we can see that the weapons which they are distributing over the last 3 years, particularly over the last 1.5 years, is small pistols, and they're coming in huge numbers. So it is quite likely that in the future, Pakistan may want to spark a major civil unrest or a civil anarchy, in which they are allegedly trying to arm the entire common public or civilians, which can give a very violent turn to any civil anarchy or civil protest if that happens. So certainly we need to be mentally, we need to be physically prepared for that kind of scenario. Along with that, on the governance part, I must say that we have not made much successes. On the development front, the lofty announcements have been made, but the governance part is an area where we are seriously lacking, and we still continue to follow a very laid-back bureaucratic approach And people are suffering with a massive resentment because of this governance issue. They complain of very serious bureaucratic arrogance, and there's a complete political vacuum due to which they're not able to make their demands to people who were socially, politically active previously. And it's very difficult for them to reach out to the bureaucrats. Bureaucrats have their own style of functioning. So that is one area where we really need to focus, and we need out of the box solutions. Certainly, first one which I would recommend is to like innovate the political space, to re-energize that space. And that doesn't necessarily mean going straight away for the assembly elections and simply reviving that old mainstream politics infrastructure, which in a way had become willingly or unwillingly a part of the terror system which Pakistan promoted. What we can do is that we can empower the new breed of political leaders, the panchayat leaders, the councillors, and we can give them new ideas, we can give them budgetary powers, we can do that. Besides that, Kashmir also needs a very innovative approach in terms of dealing with radicalization. We need to send behavioral psychologists to this Kashmir. We need to address the drug problem. We need to unleash a new narrative, engage with the youth. Some kind of communication needs to be established. And from that, we can, from those origins, we can certainly talk about, the peace, stability. Certainly, it's going to take time because the conflict has remained for last 30 years. Security forces and intelligence agencies will continue to improvise and continue to work on the security front. But as a civil society, as the members of the government, as the members of the bureaucracy, a lot needs to be done. And here I rest my case. And thank you so much. I guess if I've exceeded my time limit, my apologies. Thank you so much. Over to you, sir.
You're absolutely within time. And I think it was very well put. And as I had requested, please don't explain your rationale. Everyone here understands the rationale. You explained your points extremely well. I have only one observation which you may like to look at when we discuss at the end of it. The whole issue of, you spoke about mass uprising by induction of small arms and weapons and things like that. Also, 10,000 surrendered terrorists still exist in Jammu and Kashmir, not under anybody's control as such, not that I'm aware of. And these are sleeper agents virtually sitting in Kashmir, which can become a major nuisance for us in case something is done about them in the future. And also the Jamaatis, along with the overground workers, form a very large segment of people within the valley. But very well taken. Your arguments very well taken. We'll discuss this subsequently as we go along. May I now request, yes, Mike, may I request you to kindly take on the next part of the thing. 10 minutes for you, please.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate the invitation to participate. I do apologize again that I'll need to leave in about 30 minutes from now. I'll keep my remarks brief and look forward to listening to as much as I can. So I'll be zooming out a bit, so to speak. I've been asked to focus less on the actual Article 370 application move itself and more so on the broader global picture. I've been asked to focus on the international setting in terms of how things have played out over the last 3 years. And so I'll do that by making two broad points, one on global perceptions and reactions to what happened 3 years ago today and how those have evolved over the last 3 years, and two, the geopolitical story. How has what happened 3 years ago impacted regional geopolitics? So first on the question of reactions and perceptions globally, I think it's sort of, not to state the obvious, but global attention has died down in a big way to the events of August 5, 2019. In fact, I have not seen many, if any, media outlets outside of India or Pakistan even mentioning that today is the 3-year anniversary. Now, back 3 years ago, it was arguably one of, if not the biggest international relations news story in the world for several days. And you had reactions across the board, including from a number of governments around the world. And in the weeks and months that followed August 5, 2019, there continued to be considerable amounts of news coverage, debates in scholarly and analytical circles, and also within some government circles, namely parliaments, though I would argue that those discussions really focused less on the Article 370 move itself and more so on the consequences of the move. So there was a lot of focus on concerns about the rights implications emanating from the move, as well as some of the actions that came, the arrests, detentions, and also the internet shutdowns attracted a tremendous amount of attention globally. Now, that said, there was no government anywhere that decided to change its policy toward how it looked at the Kashmir issue, including the U.S. And I should sort of say, just as a quick diversion, there were some observers that reacted to a statement that President Trump made sometime after the move, when he essentially appeared to say, well, I'm happy to mediate. But I think that more thoughtful commentators would recognize that he really was not making an offer to mediate, and he was therefore not changing U.S. policy, which has always been to view this issue as one that does not entail U.S. or any type of third-party mediation. What President Trump said was, if both sides, if India and Pakistan, ask me to intervene, then I will. Clearly, that was not going to be a request that India would make. Perhaps he was trying to appease concerns in Pakistan about how the U.S. wasn't doing enough to bring attention to it, or whatever the case may be. So he was essentially trying to appease both sides, but it did not reflect a change in U.S. policy. U.S. policy has not changed on the issue of Kashmir. Of course, now there's a fair amount of quiet, not much debate globally on what happened 3 years ago. One reason for that is quite simply that the news cycle has become so crazy over the last 2 years, in the sense that we've had several typically once-in-a-generation developments that have all coincided. The pandemic took over everything for several years, which emerged just a few months after August 5. And then, of course, the U.S.-China competition really intensified, and more recently, the war in Ukraine has clearly been the dominant foreign policy news story around the West and beyond. Also, I would argue that those few individuals, prominent individuals, including world leaders, that had sought to capitalize on the moment posed by what happened on August 5, 2019, and have sought to bring more attention to the issue, they're no longer in power. And obviously Imran Khan is the one that comes to mind. Pakistan, of course, has always been the one country that has tried to make this into an international issue and tried to internationalize it. While he was in power during the first year or so after August 5, 2019, he made it a huge issue, so big that it actually caused a spat between Pakistan and several of its key partners within the OIC, including Saudi Arabia. There was actually a major crisis in Pakistan-Saudi relations because Pakistan thought Saudi Arabia was not doing enough to take Pakistan's side. But at any rate, that died down. Imran Khan is no longer in power, and some of the additional noise that had come from the likes of Turkey and a few other places, just not hearing about it as much now. And another reason for why the attention has died down perhaps is the fact that many of the predictions that some critics and commentators have made have not come to pass. Concerns about unrests, surges in violence, which would be big news stories if they were to be there, that has not come to pass. It's not to say the situation doesn't remain tense, volatile, but some of those predictions of large-scale unrest have not come to pass, and because they didn't come to pass, there's no reason to be focusing on those issues. Secondly, the issue of geopolitics. How has the abrogation of Article 370 affected geopolitics? I think initially one of the biggest predictions was that the move would worsen India's relations with China and Pakistan, and it would strengthen Pakistan's relations with China. Of course, this was a move that impacted Ladakh, and we know that China has its claims to Ladakh. And so we then come to 2020, to the summer of 2020, when the Galwan clash occurred, when you had the crisis in Ladakh. And a number of commentators, including myself, believe that the move that India made in August 5, 2019 may have contributed to China's decision to stage the provocations that it did. I'm not saying it's the only potential trigger. Certainly, infrastructure development that India was doing on its side of the border certainly could have had an impact. and also just the broader realities, the trends in geopolitics, how India had been deepening its military relationship with the U.S. in a big way. Obviously, that would, and China as well, just because of this wolf warrior diplomacy type policy it was having, these very nationalistic policies that it was beginning to implement. I think that's the broader context that we should see this in. But clearly, China did not respond well positively to the move. And so I think that we can't rule out that it may have been a factor in its decision to stage those provocations in Ladakh in the summer of 2020. But if you look at how things have played out more recently, things have gone in a different direction. India-China relations continue to be very tense. Not even getting into India-Pakistan relations. We don't have to go there. India-China relations have remained tense, but I think we started to see that China's own actions, its military actions, its provocations have more recently taken place far beyond India and its neighborhood. I think that a lot of the attention now is on the South China Sea and, of course, Taiwan. Certainly, it is, I think, notable that in recent months we've seen China deepen its naval presence in the Western Indian Ocean region, and but that is not necessarily something that we should tie to what India did with its Article 370 revocation. I think that's more of a broader manifestation of China's broader policies of trying to spread its power, deepen its power, intensify its presence throughout the world, including in the Indian Ocean region, which certainly should be concerning for India, but not necessarily something that should be tied to what happened 3 years ago. So those are just some brief thoughts. I'll end there. Happy to address any questions if I'm able to stay for that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much for giving the geopolitical angle. And that's a very, very important angle, particularly outlining the reasons for why things are quiet on the international front as far as Jammu Kashmir is concerned. I think you brought it out brilliantly. We can tweak this program a wee bit, take advantage of your presence here. Perhaps at this stage, we've got 2 more speakers to come in. They can come in, but we can take 5 minutes for maybe 1 or 2 odd questions at this particular time. So if there are questions, Hussain, I'll just come back to you in a minute. Is there anyone from among the people who are visible, otherwise who are not panelists? Is there anyone who wishes to ask a question?
General Hasnain, it's in the chat box. The questions are in the chat box.
Okay,
Yes.
I'll just see it 1 second. Is the chat box visible to us also?
Yes, yes.
It is.
It's
Yes,
visible.
yes. Okay, yeah. There isn't any question as such here. There are just suggestions about the format of the seminar as such. But if there's anyone who has, if not, then Mr. Bazan, I'll request you to go ahead with your question.
To acknowledge and thank Mr. Kugelman before he starts his day on the other side of the pond from me here. Michael, money talks, Ummah solidarity walks, which perhaps goes some way to explaining why Turkey has become reticent in recent times, although Erdogan made a few noises on Kashmir. Since the inception of the Turkish Republic in October 23, to date, the largest deal for anything anywhere sold in Turkey has been the Indian Navy's deal, Hindustan Shipyard and their Turkish counterparts joint 5 frigate supplier vessel contract for $2.1 billion. And Erdogan is obviously therefore reticent to make too many noises and oblige Imran Khan or a successor, whoever that may be in times to come. But as you rightly put it, Turkey has dialed it down, and that has been playing on Turkish minds for a while. This joint design and construction project that Hindustan Shipyard signed with Ankara. Thank you.
If I may add to that, in the context of that excellent intervention just now, the level of interest expressed in the OIC, 57 nations, the level of interest expressed there, even at the height, even on just after 5th of August, didn't carry that kind of a weight of argument. And considering that Pakistan, 200 million Muslim nation, is an important part of the 57 nation organization. Do you think there's something here which we are not catching on to? Why has the sentiment not aligned itself with Pakistan on this issue, the Islamic sentiment in particular?
Thank you. Well, thank you to both of you for the interventions. I admit I'm not an expert on Turkish foreign policy or politics, so I would just thank Dr. Wagmar for that very useful intervention. It's a very useful data point for me, so thank you for that. So to the question from General Hasnain about the OIC, good question. I simply respond with perhaps what would be the conventional wisdom that the OIC countries value their relations with India, particularly through a commercial lens, and would see opportunities for engaging with India and would want to engage with India, particularly on commercial levels. Obviously, we know that India has very important commercial relations with many of the OIC countries, mainly for energy reasons. And my sense is that many of these countries simply don't want to get involved in this whole thing, understanding that it would not benefit their relations with India if they were to start taking a position more aligned with that of Pakistan. So I think that's probably why they've chosen to stay quiet. That's really the best explanation I can give, because indeed it is striking. If there's one region, a global body that one would expect to turn up the volume, so to speak, after what happened 3 years ago, it would be the OIC countries. But again, the fact that you didn't have that, I think, suggests, going back to what was said earlier, that money talks, and these commercial considerations are important. Not saying that the OIC countries want to take India's side, so to speak, on the actual issue, the actual Kashmir issue, but more so just a desire not to rock the boat. And I think many other countries around the world feel the same way. Just stay out of the fray. It can be a really messy issue. Better to focus on maintaining those important ties with India, which again are so important in the context of the OIC because of the energy relations between the OIC countries and India. Thank you.
I see a few questions now appearing here, but they are not really related to the geopolitical side so much as they are to perhaps the development part of it. There's one from Ambika Bhargav. Okay, let me try putting this question to you, Michael. It says, my concerns are regarding the students of Kashmir being sent to these countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Turkey precisely, and also Iran for higher education, particularly about the students who are going to Pakistan. Wouldn't they be used as a media to act against India in one or more ways? I'm not sure that the policy on Kashmiri students going to Pakistan-occupied Kashmir has been rescinded. To my best of my knowledge, I don't think that policy is being pursued anymore. But yes, Kashmiri students are going to a large number of Islamic countries, Iran for one, definitely, and many others, including Bangladesh. Michael, do you think, in your wisdom, do you think having these students go to these countries, do you think there is any kind of a threat which can develop towards Indian security from that angle?
I mean, this is not something that I've looked at very closely, but I think that no one should be denied an opportunity to get an education or a higher education, especially if it's difficult to do that where they are at home. So obviously one should never be complacent about such things, for sure. But I know of no reason to think that there should be security concerns. And we've got a number of Kashmiri students in the United States. Quite frankly, there've never been any issues. I know it's a difference, maybe not the right comparison, but no, I don't see any. My view is a very simple one. No one should be denied the opportunity for an education, especially a higher education. And if it's difficult to get that where they are, so it's fine with me, quite frankly. And just to pick up on another point that was made in the chat box about the OIC being completely silent on the Xinjiang Muslim, on the Uyghur Muslim issue, goes to the broader point of what I said before. The OIC, it values its trade relations with these countries, India and China. And while one think that while one would think they may want to take a stand, they're not going to do that for reasons that we discussed. But yeah, the China issue, I think, is even starker given the horrible things happening to the Uyghur community there. So thank you.
General
Okay,
Hasnain,
I think, yeah.
can I something to this question of Indian student, Kashmiri students going to the other countries? Can I just add a point?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So if I understand correctly, the question was made in the context of this, the use of medical seats in Kashmir for terror funding business. So that is certainly an issue in which we came across various cases in which the medical seats were being sold to Kashmiri students by the Hurriyat leaders in Kashmir. They used to take money from Kashmiri students in Kashmir, so that money was generally distributed among the terrorist organizations and various separatist factions, separatist media groups. And in Pakistan, the ISI people, their army people, they would generally take care of the students visiting Pakistan for the higher education. Sometimes these students were also used for communication, for even other logistical purposes. Their families based in Kashmir, they were used for routing funds, they were used for distributing logistical materials, etc. So that is certainly an area. And in 2017 and 18, we also came across incidents of Kashmiri students going to Pakistan. They were trained in weapons. They were given 20 days training, and then they were sent back to Kashmir. And some of them emerged as hybrid militants like in the recent past. So these are the few areas where security agencies and NIA has become very skeptical, and they have become very guarded as far as sending Kashmiri students abroad is concerned, like or Kashmiri students going to foreign nations for education is concerned. But government has recently come out with a policy where they have abolished, they have they've banned the degrees in medical sciences and engineering courses which the students have obtained from Pakistan particularly. Besides that, the students are also going to Turkey, where they mostly volunteer for the human rights courses, international relations courses, and they're generally used to build a narrative. The brighter students are sent to UK, they are sent to Germany, where ISI sells work, and they support them, they fund them, and they use these people just to build a right intellectual narrative which is against India, which is pro-Pakistan. So some of these cases are definitely a very genuine concern. But then again, I would definitely agree with Michael that people should not be denied or should not be barred with any serious educational opportunity. And Government of India has been making serious efforts in extending educational opportunities to Kashmir. They opened this new IIM, new IIT in Jammu, and various other institutes. They have also come up in Jammu and Kashmir. So that is one area we have to be very serious about. But with that, the security aspect remains a prime concern. Thank you.
I agree entirely with Michael, and I agree with you, Abhinav. But what we have to remember is that the past narrative, before this government came to power, or maybe just prior to 2016-17, the concept was the emphasis on democracy, on liberalism to a very great extent. And it was perceived that the image that India was creating internationally by following a very liberal policy in Jammu and Kashmir was actually giving us certain dividends, perhaps abroad. It was not really in tangible terms at that particular time. Since then, and since these kind of incidents have multiplied over a period of time since 2016, I think a very conscious decision was taken to a course correction. That course correction has been done exactly in the manner which Abhinav has just said. I am all for that. Where you anticipate an intelligence-based focus on students from India going anywhere internationally, I think the government of India is duty-bound to make sure that they protect those students. Of course, the freedom to go and study anywhere, particularly for higher studies, must continue to remain. We are a democracy, we are liberal in our overall approach, but the moment it starts impinging on your national security, you have to take cognizance of it. I'm not saying you have to deny it, but you have to start taking cognizance of it. I'll come back. Yes, Mr. Wagmar, over to you, and that's the last intervention before we go on to our next speakers.
Indian intelligence got wind of this, and quite rightly so, that a certain conspicuous sliver of disaffected Muslim students from the valley were being arranged, given visas, subvented air tickets to fly to Istanbul, for these human rights and other IR courses or other courses in the humanities. Upon arrival there, General Hasnain, and this has been proven, Turkish intelligence was tacitly handing them to ISI operatives on ground. This has been proven, quite rightly so, and I do believe it has been brought up privately with Ankara. Then there is the question of, there are certain ramifications, two ramifications from it very briefly. Erdogan has a bee in his bonnet, or did, about Turkey's Bombay consulate at Bandra, because it just so happened to be filled with Gulenists back in the day, before he purged all of them from Turkish diplomatic missions and the defense forces and the intelligence and the judiciary, as you know. And for some reason, he developed this idea that Bombay was a hotbed of Gulenists. And of course, that partly affected his thinking against India too. And of course, then the other questions did come up, and I had occasion to bring this up with New Delhi. I don't know how far it's gone and who bothers to listen to a historian, but Bombay Airport has been signed off to a Turkish Kuwaiti consortium, the entire area and the contract per se, for on tarmac airside ground handling for 25 plus years. And the party in question is involved with Erdogan's family and the crony capitalists around him in Ankara. Remember that when Tehran Airport, the new terminal, opened in the 2000s, when it did open, the Revolutionary Guards refused to have its inauguration until the Turks left. It was jointly built by Austrians and Turks together. And here, I don't know how in God's good name with privatization, India went ahead and had this contract with Chelabi Nas. Chelabi is there who handles Delhi IGI Terminal 3 and 2, but also Bombay Airport. And there are questions to be asked about a full-fledged Turkish company, particularly when these disaffected groups are involved. One may not be able to completely dot all the I's and cross the T's, but it was something that was brought up, and I certainly did some time back. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for staying on with us till now. Thank you for your interventions and your responses to the questions. You may like to leave whenever you wish. We will now go on to the next part, and I request Dr. Suneem Khan to be our next speaker.
First of all, a Jai Hind to General Hasnain, and a very good evening to everyone. I have been keenly listening to the participants in the meeting, and General Hasnain, of course, we have been following as a senior officer for long enough now. He has been the corps commander here, military scientist par excellence, who knows Kashmir up and close more than anyone, I can fairly say, in the country. I'll stick to the shortest duration of time General Hasnain wants me to stick to as a Kashmiri, giving my perspective about the abrogation of Article 370 on August 5th, 2019. There's a very famous saying, there's a very famous line from a couplet in Urdu. General Hasnain would bear me out on that. सितारों से आगे जहां और भी है अभी इश्क के इम्तिहान और भी है. There's a world beyond stars, and there are many examinations that we have to face as far as love is concerned. So that is the part I will reserve for the governance part. And as far as what Article 370 has served me as a Kashmiri, Article 370 abrogation has served me as a Kashmiri, is an instant cessation of the political orgy on the dead bodies of young children, on the floorboard of young floorboard of the dead bodies of young children. And by the way, I would also divert a bit to Dr. Wagmar about his mention of the plebiscite that he gave an insight to all of us. Dr. Wagmar, perhaps you forgot to make a very important mention about the fiats, administrative fiats Islamabad is to date using to administer day-to-day administration in Pakistan illegally occupied Kashmir. So coming back to the core discussion, abrogation of Article 370 on 5th August 2019. I would just for understanding, quote, an incident, I have been talking to Abhinav about this. We have had long animated discussions on multiple occasions. General Hasnain would bear me out on this. Perhaps you're aware, sir. There was a pregnant lady who was going from point A to point B in the middle of civil unrest that was prevalent on the roads before Article 370 abrogation on 5th August 2019. So she was intercepted by I would say a bunch of urchins, mobsters, and glorified term for them is protesters. So they asked her a question. Where are you going? Do you know? Do you don't know? Are you not aware that it's a band call? It's a hartal. Hartal is the term that they use for those imposed bands, the civil strikes. So the lady, probably willing to go to a hospital to seek medical attention, told in utter desperation to this probably 12 years old boy that she wants to go to hospital and she's pregnant and she wants to seek medical attention. And this is the road, this is the shortest possible road that she wants to use in order to reach the hospital. Now this 12-year-old boy with a neo-acquired power of being the almighty on that stretch of road resorts to the audacity of the next level by asking this lady to lift her veil up, her abdomen, so that he can see and make sure that she's pregnant. This is what was prevalent on the roads, and this is what was being orchestrated by Pakistan and her proxies in Kashmir. I would not mince words. And this is what Pakistan is yearning for as on date. Because out of the two options of sending guns and arms and ammunition and men to this union territory, to this region, in order to vitiate the peaceful atmosphere and infuse that poison in the peaceful lives of the people, the cheapest option is to mobilize people from within and get them to the streets, get them in a state of conflict with the forces, and use the bad optics of that conflict in order to multiply that conflict more and more. So it's an automative process that they use. They're very smart, and we may not have achieved the sky in the past 3 years after the abrogation of Article 370 on 5th August 2019. We have to understand that this is a cancer which has been there for more than 70 years. 5th August 2019 just marked a very honest excision of the cancer. Now this cancer, in order to be radically excised and completely treated and completely eliminated, needs a bit of time, needs a bit of palliative approach, which is what we call governance, if we compare it to the parlances that I'm using, and needs a bit of supportive therapy. But this is definitely a cancer. I'm drawing the right kind of analogy. This is a cancer that we have started to excise and route it out on 5th of August 2019. That is all I have to say. Thank you, sir. Thank you, General Hasnain, for giving me the opportunity. And it's a pleasure to come across with you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suneem. Very kind of you, very kind words used by you for me. Personally, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
We will take up some questions of what you have stated. In 30 seconds, I can say the fact that you were relating here about the 12-year-old so-called leaders of the mobs in 2016-17, I can tell you that the age of the stone thrower in 2008 was averagely about 20-21 years. The average age came down in 2010-11 to about 14 to 15 years, and in 2016 it was as little as 12 years, which is very, very correct what you have just pointed out. And yes, it was Gunda Raj on the roads. It was absolute Gunda Raj. In fact, to the extent that even bureaucrats of some stature had to report to these people at local mosques, etc., and pay obeisance to them and say that they are the people who are actually in control of Kashmir. This was the situation in 2016-17, the time when the famous Robin Hood, what was his name? The famous young guy who was killed in 2016?
Burhan Wani.
Burhan Wani, 8th of July, Burhan Wani.
Don't forget the girlfriend.
Sorry?
And don't forget the jilted girlfriend. Hell hath
Yes,
me as a woman.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely
So,
correct.
let's
Which
now request Dr. Jeganaathan, the last of our panelists, to come in with his intervention. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, and it's thanks to Usanas Foundation for collaborating with us. But it's indeed a great honor for us to collaborate on this particular issue. What I'm going to do is, after listening from all the panelists, I'm going to limit myself to the last 3 years, and I'm going to share my observation since I've been here since 2013. So I'm witness to the changes and the transition in the past 8-9 years. So I'm going to share my observation, and also particularly I'm going to focus on the since 2019 the historic decision to abrogate Article 370 happened, then the post. To my mind, as a scholar, it is 3 years is a short time to assess or analyze and come to some sort of conclusion on any political scenario or security scenario. So what we can do is that what I'm going to do is that in the last 3 years, after this abrogation of Article 370, the first 1 year was spent to control and consolidate the ground and control the situation. And in that, I would say we can give a grade A. We succeeded in that. And in fact, the international community had, in fact, sort of a sense of appreciation that the way we handled the situation without firing a single bullet, any major bloodshed. As Pandya has mentioned that since he was directly witness to the developments happening in the Raj Bhavan, there were expectations that the things will go out of control and more number of people will pick up arms and there will be a complete chaos. But it turned out to be sort of a more of a manageable and it was under control. Then the change of governor, it was in the direct governor rule, it was in the governor rule. Then the change of governor, a bureaucrat was appointed as a governor, hoping that what General Hasnain has in the opening remarks mentioned about this development agenda. So that's an agenda to bring back the development agenda to the JNK, the new JNK, which has been lagging behind for last 75 years due to this dominance of the security agenda and also the geopolitical Indo-Pak caught in the Indo-Pak bilateral thing. So this development agenda was brought back in the first years, and they were trying to build it up. Then you immediately 6 months after this development, these changes happened. Of course, somebody mentioned about this internet shutdown and youths were unhappy, but I totally sort of disagree with that point that we have been interacting with the students. Even those days, there were some disagreements, there were some resentment that internet services are not being restored, but overall the people were adapted to that situation in the initial 6 months. Then immediately you had this COVID-19. So from period 2020 to 2021, I would say last August, it was very difficult for any governance, from the governance point of view, even the administration point of view, even to an extent the security point of view. And remember one thing, the COVID had hit the tourism industries across the world, and Jammu Kashmir is not immune to that which is heavily dependent on the tourism industry, and they face the wrath of this COVID-19. The tourism industry will shatter. And then you had the new governor again, the present one, LG Lieutenant Governor has been appointed. He had the need was felt that there was a lack of connect, what Pandya has mentioned about between the Raj Bhavan and particularly the governor and the mass and the people and the various section of the political leaders and other civil society representatives. So there's a new governor had filled that particular need to engage with the various spectrum of people, including the political leaders and in terms of the engaging, expediting the governance process and the development projects. So in the last 1 year, I would see that there are the changes and the developments which is happening despite this COVID second wave, and despite that many sort of difficulties, it is quite unprecedented. And I'm sure that General Hasnain would agree with me. This is quite unprecedented. Never seen such sort of things happening in terms of governance and development efforts. If you look at the kind of projects which has been sanctioned from the central government, as well as the kind of investments the J&K Union Territory under it's attracting. No, we never imagined that the Lulu group will invest in Srinagar, and that's like sort of a master stroke and the kind of investments. I'm going to give some black those figures and things. So development agenda again brought to the center stage of the strategy in order to change the the J&K into the development part. There are two developments, interesting developments, which as a security expert to be very cautious and concerned. One is the takeover of Taliban in Afghanistan in 2020. Particularly, it is the entire leadership, Taliban leadership, and the dominance of the Haqqani networks, which everyone knows that they have the backing of the Pakistan's deep state, and we don't know what sort of things are going to and what sort of repercussions that we are going to face in the future. And that's an important development, and we are very keenly observing on that. We are also engaging with the Taliban, the new regime, the new Talibans, and also continuing our effort in Afghanistan. The second point is that the Russia-Ukraine war, as Kugelman had highlighted, that the global attention has died down. I completely agree with that. And particularly the after this Ukraine war, Ukraine crisis, it is totally sort of the Western focus is totally towards Russia. But there is a point that we need to be more concerned about, very serious about. But this part, to my mind, it has brought back to the 1979, the Soviet, the Cold War, Soviet and US sort of era. Pakistan is slowly gaining its geopolitical, because that's the only asset that Pakistan can capitalize on it, and slowly gaining its that. The killing of Zawahiri, a lot of things have been attributed to the Pakistan DPS establishment. Perhaps they could have shared the vital, the critical information to the CIA. These are all the coming in the newspapers. But what indicates is that the Pakistan deep state, which is currently in a deep crisis after Imran Khan exit, and given the countries, the economy, and also the debt due to the China-Pakistan economic corridor and the Chinese investments. All these things, push the military establishment, particularly the Pakistan military, to move towards the US. The Al-Qaeda, the killing of the Al-Zawahiri is the sort of very interesting turning moment to read upon between the lines that what exactly the geopolitical, the realignment or the change is happening. So to my mind, my analysis observation is that Pakistan is regaining its, sort of getting back to this, the US, close to the US, and exploiting this Russian factor, Russia-US and the Ukraine conflict. And that is going to be a big challenge for Indian security establishment, and that's where we need to be very cautious about, and in Jammu and Kashmir in the years to come. Or if you wanted to sustain these gains that we have consolidated in the last 3 years, and also the amount of investments that we have brought to the J&K, and also the kind of development activities that we have started, or we have been about to continue that. So the next part of my lecture is I'm just going to flag some of the data statistics share. So if you look at the trend, if 2019 to 2022, you could see the figures which would tell us that the Pakistan's support to terrorism, the cross-border terrorism, has not gone down. Rather, there has been a attempt, the blatant attempt to indigenization of the militancy, even the regrouping in the name of the resistance front, all sort of things, and also the targeted killings, like killings of Hindus. That has become a major important challenges for the security forces here. Other challenges that it has been highlighted, that again, as long as the Pakistan is kept under the grey list in the FATF, and now I think it is seems to be negotiating with the Americans to get out of it. All this, the Al-Zawahiri incident and the Russia-Ukraine crisis, there are sort of indications that Pakistan may get help from the United States to get out of the FATF. If that happens, what is going to be the impact on Jammu and Kashmir in terms of their efforts to enhance the cross-border terrorism? It's going to be a difficult scenario for us. This is my observation on this front. Given the fact that the militancy, the level of militancy, the level of terrorist organization has not died down. On the other front, the growth and development, of course, there are the figures which itself shows that the kind of investments has been coming into the J&K state, and there are structural changes. I'm witness to those structural changes in terms of governance, in terms of the way in which the administration is functioning. All these things, there's a huge changes happening on in the governance structure at the district level, even in the village level, all different levels. One successful example is the village, the BDC elections, Block Development Council elections, which were successfully conducted in both Kashmir and Srinagar in Jammu, and it indicates that the people are prefer for growth and development rather than sort of a secessionist or separatist. The post Gilani, again, I would say that separatist voices has been sort of died down. I won't say that it is totally gone, but there is a sort of that enthusiasm, that sort of motivation is not there. But all these things needs to be consolidated. I completely agree with what Pandya mentioned, that we need to bring back this political process as quickly as possible if we wanted to consolidate these gains, if we wanted to sustain this, whatever the gains we made. The lack of political parties to engage with the masses, particularly ruling political party, is a big, I would say, particularly in Jammu region, there are a lot of quite resentment, the way in which the ruling party political leaders are engaging with the masses. In the valley itself, there is a sort of a political vacuum. The old leaders are no longer being accepted, or in terms of by the masses. When all the leaders were put behind the bar, there was not even a single protest by the cadres to support their arrest of against the arrest of those leaders. So the leaders also they have been exposed, terribly exposed, but that's created a vacuum, and how we are going to fill that vacuum process. The most important critical point, which is going to be the most the defining factor, is the elections. When are we going to conduct elections, and the delimitation process? The delimitation process has already been done. The draft has been notified. It looks like a more balanced, and it's also testing the water from both the regions. There are some resentments among particular point, but what it has done, which has not been done in 75 years, is that there is a recognition, there is a application of the central laws, and there is a sort of a social justice element to the overall democratic process, which this delimitation process intend to achieve. For instance, the reserve categories, which was not been given in the last 75 years, and they are now, the seats are going to be reserved, and this would uplift the marginalized society, particularly in the hilly areas, and that will give an adequate representations to even including the West Pakistan refugees, the Valmikis, and also the scheduled tribes, ST status. I think that's going to complete the entire democratic process, and we have to wait and see probably the next year, and if the election process starts, how we are going to handle it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jagan. Thank you very much. Very, very comprehensive, and you covered the economic and social agenda extremely well, and topped it at the end by a brief mention and analysis of the political narrative also, particularly as to when and how the electioneering process will probably take place. But while you were speaking, I was looking and perusing the chat box, which is turning out to be more exciting than a Western film even. Very, very interesting if you just glance through it. And I picked up some points here and there. Dr. Suneem spoke the least, but he spoke very well and delivered a fair content, but he spoke less. So I'm going to give him a chance to explain one or two things which have appeared in the chat box. So you will all agree with me that one of the major challenges before us in Jammu and Kashmir, which we are all aware of, but none of us really have had an idea as to how to go about tackling it, is the issue of radicalization. I will come back to Abhinav also to ask him to give us a brief intervention on how he thinks, based on his book, what does he think about it. But before that, I would want to go on to Dr. Suneem to ask him what is his opinion about this. And a brief indicator on this, to me, in my reading and my experience, the best model I have come across for de-radicalization, counter-radicalization, has been what has been affected in Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, a network. And there the clergy has been used very, very effectively, starting with 4 clergymen, now amounting to 75 of them, who are what are called the internet imams. They're primarily to clarify change the thought processes of young people who are interpreting scriptures and interpreting hadiths and things like that to whatever suits them, whatever suits their intent. How has this been tackled by those governments is a fairly good lesson for us to look at and observe. But over to Dr. Suneem for what he feels is the antidote to radicalization in the valley.
Thank you, General Hasnain, once again, sir. I was just answering to a participant in the meeting about the process of de-radicalizations. She tried to seek an answer from me in the chat box, which is just not possible. So I told her that it's a very extensive subject, an academic discourse, which has multiple facets. I have, in my own little way, pursued literature on that. I have closely read about many conflicts across the globe, and I'm somebody who has lived Kashmir conflict right from the beginning. I have, besides living it, extensively read about it, being a keen observer of men and matters almost at all junctions, keen observer of all the important events which have brought us at this point where we are talking about it. So de-radicalization with respect to Kashmir conflict has to be a multiple strata, multiple approach thing, which has to concomitantly start from prisons to schools to higher education centers with the it doesn't have to be purely the mandate of security forces. I mean, you can't bank with the process of de-radicalization completely on the shoulders of security forces. You have to understand that they are an arm of the state. They are not the state in themselves. They can do their bit, but it is ultimately the civil society. It is ultimately the well-meaning citizen who wants to see. You have to actually have a fire in the belly to yearn for a blooming society. You have to actually have a fire in the belly to see your society blooming. You have to actually be very conscious about what you are going to bequeath or leave as a bequest for the next generation to come. So that is the thought you have to ingrain in your mind. That is the thought you have to lit up in your mind as a fire. That is the thought you have to place in the frontal lobe of your mind in the scientific terms, and then work on it. It needs a very robust, very vibrant participation of all sections of the society, from the clergy men to the working class proletariat, as we call them, to the business community, to the trade community, to the students. The de-radicalization is a subject that has to be spoken extensively at all levels. You have to prepare the ground for it. You have to make the atmosphere favorable for it. And then, as I said, it has to start at all levels, especially these three pillars, which I mentioned in my small sentence that I presented in the chat box to Saloni, I guess. Prisons, schools, and higher education centers. Besides, we have to understand that we are a separate cultural entity. Fine, we are Muslims. We have adopted Islam as a way of life, but we have to understand, we have to go into the historical perspective of it. We have adopted Islam as the way of life, being Muslims, with a cultural baggage. That's a different academic discourse. But our cultural baggage is mainly about peace, syncretism, and inclusive existence. We have to remember that. We have to be very mindful of that. We have to tell this to our next generation, that we have to be syncretic, we have to be pluralistic, we have to be inclusive. That's how our older generations have been. That's how our next generations have to be, and that's how our rest of the country is, and that's how our region has to be, and that's where the growth lies. That's where the progress lies. Otherwise, we are going to be known as self-defeatist parasites who meant a defeat for themselves. So de-radicalization is a process which needs a robust involvement from practically everyone in Kashmir, not only the security forces, with due respect to what they have been doing, with due regard to what they are doing. They are doing their bit. Very honestly, I must give it to each man in each force operating on the terrain of Kashmir to make sure that the citizen sleeps peacefully. But here it is. We are at a juncture of time where we need to involve every strata of society, particularly the youth. We need to make them feel important. We need to make them feel as the representatives of very important representatives of the society who can take the message forward. Ultimately, it is them who have to build this nation. They are the assets in one way or the other. That is broadly what the de-radicalization to me is about in Kashmir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suneem. That was a very, very interesting explanation of the whole thing. Abhinav, would you like to come in for a minute, perhaps?
Yeah.
Sir, Abhinav, just a second, just to add.
Yeah, Dr. Suneem.
Just to add to what Mr. Jeganath said about internet outage after 5th August 2019. It did happen. There is no denying to it. It was mandatory. It was necessary. And why it was necessary can be explained in one line. For a Kashmiri mother, the options were two in number. Either to see her son dying in a quagmire, in a quicksand of street conflict, or to have the internet outage for some time to block the manufactured outrage, the big blow of propaganda warfare which Pakistan tried to unleash on we Indians and we Kashmiris at that point in time. So we didn't lose our youth, we didn't lose our children, we didn't give the opportunities to our adversary to play that political orgy on the floorboard of dead bodies of our children. So I think we made a fair amount of choice. That's what I would want to add to Mr. Jeganath.
I would definitely endorse that. I would accept it that it happened, and it happened for good measure. Because when your narrative is strong, but you don't know how to play out your narrative because of whatever reasons, and your communication strategy is not strong enough, you need to take defensive measures. This always happens with the armed forces. If we find that in a particular area we are not strong enough to go in for an offensive, we make sure that we dig in and defend ourselves. This is exactly the strategy which was played out by the government of India in Jammu and Kashmir, and I think there is no need to be in denial of that at all. It is fully justified. Yes, Abhinav.
Yeah. So I'll begin with the idea that Kashmiris as people, technically speaking, mentally speaking, intellectually speaking, they are most unfit for radicalization. Most unfit. Okay. And this is something which even the people from the terrorist organizations, like, the people associated with that business, they have told me personally that Taliban would never they have never felt happy with Kashmiris because they don't find them religiously honest enough as far as radicalization is concerned. So I guess, and in the same society, we see that, which is on one hand, which is highly radicalized on religious grounds. On the other hand, we see that even girls are heavily into drugs. There was one figure which was like 50 to 60% females in the colleges, they were heavily into drugs. So we need to understand what kind of radicalization is prevailing in Kashmir. I guess first and foremost, in terms of solutions, we need to launch a heavy crackdown on organizations like Jamaat-e-Islami, which dominate the social sphere. So people are acting, in a particular manner because of fear, because they are scared of these organizations like Jamaat-e-Islami. They need to be driven out from colleges, from universities, from administration. Personally, sir, students from Kashmir University have approached me, especially after the abrogation of Article 370. And they told that, so-and-so professor, like he is Jamaat thing, we want to convey it to the university vice chancellor professor. But they have no access because they know that the people who they would be approaching for, addressing this problem, they are affiliated with Jamaat. Secondly, as you rightly said, we need to bring the religious authorities who can promote the right religious discourse, a good religious debate on all these issues. That will make a major headway in addressing this problem of radicalization. Thirdly, there is this huge problem of the trauma associated with this conflict. That also makes people strongly, and that intellectual vacuum which is prevailing at a very larger level in the society. So we certainly need to bring people who are experts in behavioral sciences, people who can do some kind of psychological healing, who can talk to the youngsters. when Mr. Governor Malik was in Kashmir, he started an initiative inviting youngsters to Raj Bhavan and just engaging them in a conversation. They said that, why do you pick up guns? What kind of, religious scripture that you can cite? Since he was from Aligarh Muslim University, he was an expert in religious discourses also. So it used to be a very good discussion. And after the discussion, the students were convinced. And we need to understand that, it's the people of Kashmir who have taken very strong participation in the police forces and, and come up with a very strong force against terrorism. Certainly, I mean, and I would say radicalization is a major problem, but in Kashmir that can be tackled. It is not a very Taliban kind of radicalization or the South Punjab in Pakistan kind of radicalization. We can tackle it with the right measures and by reaching out, by right religious discourse, education, a multi-pronged approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhinav. Although we've got very little, in fact, we are over our time, but I will probably go back to one more question at least. But my opinion, I must just express it very, very briefly. Remember, on the ground, when you got to do this in the valley and you got this responsibility on your head, you will find different people in a situation. 20 different people will come and point fingers at 20 different other people and say, these are all Jamatis. You see, the sense of vendetta in the valley is very, very high. You have to understand this. Since I've been a person who's been meeting a lot of people on the ground, going everywhere I went, a Kashmiri would always complain against his neighbor. Right? So it's not an easy thing to be able to do this. This has to be a movement. A civil society movement, as was suggested by Dr. Suneem. It has to be a civil society movement. But engagement is necessary. Now, engagement is not sadbhavna, which means that you are doing some project and you are saying, I'm engaging with people. No, it has to be deliberate. You have to go to the people. A town hall kind of a event is what appeals to a lot of people in Kashmir. The moment you are in your element to speak to them and then allow them to come to the podium and speak to you, you will find that these conversations which take place there are of immense value, tremendous. And they take out a tremendous amount of bottled up, rage inside people, and you find people feel much better because of it. So this is one of the things that need to be done. This is a long term. This is nothing short term. This has to be a very long term kind of a thing. I'm very, very impressed with the young people who are writing in the chat box today. This chat box needs to be preserved. Abhinav, is very nice. I'm finding a lot of people who have great ideas, great thoughts. We tend to dismiss the young people and say they don't have the experience, and they've got the innovations, they've got the innovative ideas, right? Dated people like me sometimes like to go into something that we have tried before and failed in doing. But here are the younger people who are coming up with some great ideas. One last issue which I think is a social issue. Let's ask Dr. Jagan, perhaps. He could look at this since he deals with young people in the university. The drugs problem is a huge problem in Kashmir. Right? It's not a political issue, it's not a financial issue, it's a social issue. You can't allow Jammu and Kashmir to go down the Punjab way. And this is what is being attempted here. The attempt is to try and take Jammu and Kashmir down the Punjab way. Get people hung up on drugs and things like that. Is there anyone here besides Dr. Jagan? I'll ask him, of course, to speak, who would like to intervene on this and give us an answer as to how can we fight this better? Dr. Jagan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I just wanted to address this issue of the drugs. And before that, in 2019 October, soon after this abrogation, within the 3 months, that time most of the Kashmiri students were studying in our university. We have a good number of students from Kashmir Valley studying in our university, courses like English and computer science, and they were also hostelers. So they got stuck. They could not able to communicate with with the parents and all. So they got stuck here in a way. Then soon after that, they have a COVID within 6 months. So it is like they permanently stayed for almost a year without traveling to Valley. So we interacted with one of the webinars, Zoom webinar. Jammu used to have a sort of a 2G connections at that time, and most of the classes were conducted in Google Meet. So I find the Kashmiri students, when we were discussing about how do they feel about these changes happen. And remember one thing, this is my observation, they are much more politically sensitive than the students of Jammu region. And they are very much aware of all the facts and figures that we have been discussing regarding the historical context, the geopolitical context, the strategic context. These students are very well aware of all the situation. Unlike the student from Jammu, not demeaning that, but the point is they're much more sensitive. None of them have expressed any sort of resentment, to my surprise, expressed any sort of a resentment or sort of anger or a sort of angst against what happened. Rather, it was a certain media went, blowing out of proportion, the national media itself, that going to the streets and showing that the streets are empty and just to sensitize this thing, but the students are much concerned about their studies, their career. The second aspect, the drugs. We have been seeing there is an increasing number of the drugs menace sort of spilling over into the Jammu region, particularly through the belt, the border belt, like starting from Katwa to the Samba, these two districts from the Punjab. And one of the things that we observed, because this is sort of, like you said, it's a social menace, and also sort of the post-COVID, the situation, the exams got delayed, the career got sort of disturbed, and the students have sort of lost sort of a mentoring and sort of counseling within the parents also. Sort of they left them do whatever they wanted to do. There is no directions to them for the career guidance. Their exams get delayed, their sessions get delayed. So it's like a sort of a chaos, sort of confusion, not chaos, confusion for the students. And these drug peddlers, they exploit this particular this sentiments, and they lure them into sort of the drugs. The inflow of drugs has increased due to one of the factors. I see that it's the drones. There is a correlation that the drones, number of drones, the drones menace has increased, particularly in the international border in Jammu region, and some of the drones could able to interdict, but most of them go without our notice, and we did not have a strong anti-drone sort of equipments or technology to think. So the Gurdaspur, the Punjab border, it could easily come inside the Jammu region, and Punjab, you all know, it is flooding, and it's the last 5 years of the political rule. The Punjab is completely. You go to Ludhiana bus stand in the early morning, you can see the people are openly selling the drugs, and you can easily find out. And now this culture is slowly getting into Jammu, and it's a big serious issue here. And how we are going to deal with, I think the education institutions can play an important role. And strict vigilant about the students' movement in the campus, and any outsiders that are entering into the campus. And that's a very important thing that we have to do from things. As a society at large, the administration can play more awareness, more checking of these drug peddlers. Particularly, the policing needs to be tightened, and that's what we are lagging now. The police needs to be in sync with the civil society and other organizations, NGOs. They should work on these issues. Not only in Kashmir, the similar trends I also read in the south, particularly Tamil Nadu. We were never heard about drugs. Maybe some of the sporadic few spots where you can in the cities or suburbs in Chennai you could get it. Now you get drugs in every district, and that's in south it's happening. So there is, I think that there's another way that the drugs has been sent through from across the border.
Thank you, Dr. Jagan. Thank you very much for your opinion on that. That was very, very useful. And there's a lot on the chat box. You must read up a lot of suggestions which people are offering here. There's no doubt this is going to be a social menace for quite some time. And as far as policing is concerned, there are a lot of people who are talking about police here. Let me tell you, in a region, in an area where you have problems of terrorism, you will always find that the police will get involved as a counter-terrorist police. And then social policing is something which becomes a major challenge. Now, Jammu and Kashmir police, for whom I have a lot of time, I've worked with them so much, for them I have a tremendous amount of time for them, they are very good at counter-terrorist practices. But when it comes to social policing, there are lots and lots of issues, gender sensitivity, the issue of drugs, etc. These are the kind of things which we need to go into. This is what comes up at conflict termination, conflict resolution stages. This is the stage that we are entering into now, and we must recognize it. The presence of the army is important, but you can't depend on the army to start delivering on these kind of things. Very correct. Don't even think about the army delivering on counter-radicalization. They don't even know what is Islam. If you ask a soldier the difference between a Shia and a Sunni, he'll not be able to tell you. Right? So don't depend on them at all. Yes, they are good in initiating programs. They are very, very good in organizing things. But no, ideological aspects, don't even dream about including them in this. So I think we have covered our time and covered it very well. There are some very interesting suggestions, comments, some very positive comments about the nature and quality of the presentations here. Thank you very much, and thank you, Abhinav, for this opportunity for learning for everyone. You may like to make a few remarks at the end.
Just one point. I feel that, the young students of Kashmir, the youth of Kashmir should be able to interact with Dr. Barzin Wagmar, especially the detailed historical discourse and the insights which he offered at the beginning, especially about the plebiscite, about what Jinnah did in Kashmir, the kind of visits and the original things. Because I feel that there is a huge dearth of knowledge and information about that, and even like proper research papers, which should deal with especially that historical discourse part. So I guess,
may I, as a beginning, may I invite Dr. Wagmar to come or online to speak at the Central University of Kashmir, of which I am the Chancellor. So I shall organize for you, and from Abhinav, I shall take your details and I will get in touch.
Yes.
I will be in Bombay on the 14th Sunday. I land, Dr. Hasnain, General Hasnain, and Mr. Pandya. And while we are parting with one literally travel thought before I start flying next week, next time anybody tells you Jammu and Kashmir is an open-air prison under lockdown, seriously, General Hasnain, I'm not being facetious, go to Sharjah Airport in the United Arab Emirates. Now, Mr. Pandya, why am I talking about Sharjah? And this is why, Dr. Suneem Khan, why does Go First land every day, or practically every day, 4 to 5 times a week, just after midnight UAE time, a direct international service from Srinagar to Sharjah?
I agree.
Air India Express used to operate from Srinagar to Dubai. It was not lucrative, so they moved next door to Sharjah, and now Go First is flying there. Srinagar International Airport is not just for Hajj operations, which Air India 747s would come in, General Hasnain, because it has a 12,600 feet runway. And yes, those were the only international operations all these years we heard of when Hajj operations used to depart from Srinagar. We have scheduled international flights. So next time someone tells me there's a lockdown, there's no 4G, 1G, 2, 3G, well, please ask those Kashmiris coming out of Sharjah Airport's baggage arrival lounge, how in God's good name did they get a passport, buy a ticket, and land in the United Arab Emirates at 1 in the morning? And I rest my case with that. Next time people talk nonsense, Mr. Pandya, these are the information deficit points when I throw stray facts like this. Explain to me how a flight departs through the lockdown. Why was Go First operating a flight? An airline, incidentally, that is run by Jinnah's great-grandsons, the Wadia Group. And I'll truly rest my case with that. Thank you very much, everyone.
Dr. Suneem, you've got something to say, which is absolutely important. You can go ahead.
Dr. Wagmar, our adversary Pakistan is 75 years old in optical warfare and fairly turned senile by resorting to lies and deceit. By saying there are 95 days of continuous lockdown. I replied to this thing in the morning on my tweet line that there are 95 days of the delegitimization, and pardon me on this use of this word, and a complete effective bastardization of the terrorism and its ecosystem in Kashmir.
I'm so happy to hear all these terminologies. I wish I had heard them when I was the corps commander there. At that time, I used to be fighting a lone battle in those days. Thank you very much anyway. Abhinav, thank you for this great opportunity. All the best. God bless everyone.